Hello, viewers, and welcome to the latest episode of the Huddle. I'm here with Frank Brank, Chief Data Officer at FTN Network. Frank, thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure to speak to you. At the time of recording, a couple of weeks before the NFL season, plenty of excitement, plenty of things coming up. For you guys, we've got StatsHub. Can you, from the off, as an intro, tell us all about it?
Yeah, so StatsHub is a project that I've been wanting to do, and finally got the time and the effort with our new FTN Fantasy site to build out StatsHub. What we're calling StatsHub, it's an NFL information tool and table that's going to evolve over time, but basically a way to cut up advanced NFL data in any way that our database would allow you to. When I say we've put every filter and every column imaginable into this thing, we really have. We went all the way. So for those of you looking for, advanced NFL stats, if you wanted to query something like all the quarterbacks inside the red zone in bad weather inside of 2 minutes in a one possession game, you could do that. You're going to get some crazy results probably as you keep cutting it up and cutting it up. But I do think as an information hub, our StatsHub project and our StatsHub tool that, like I said, we'll continue to evolve and continue to add and develop new things for. There's nothing really like it on the consumer side. I'm sure that some teams or the league data might be, or some data scientists perhaps in the realm of NFL football can do this sort of thing, but never, at least that I haven't seen, the consumer has access to this much information and this many filters and queries and whatnot that they could run throughout the tool.
Mm-hmm. I know NFL compared to, for example, in the UK with football and soccer, as I will politely say, some people call it soccer.
Thank you.
Obviously the use of stats has increased over the years, but NFL has always been very stats based. Is this kind of taking the normal amount of stats available and just taking it to another level? And also, is this where a buddy down the bar might be talking to their pal and they've seen something on StatsHub and say, "Oh, did you know that?" And just weave that into conversation.
I do like the application there of somebody at a bar who had recently found some tidbit of information that they could take to their buddies, right? Because I'm sure it's the same over there as it is here. People like to discuss passionately their opinions, and with our StatsHub tool, I think that you can sort of make an argument for certain aspects where before we would maybe conjecture that somebody's not very good in the red zone, or this guy's not very good in the fourth quarter, or not very good in a one possession game. But now we could actually figure that out. There are certain circumstances like, Dak Prescott isn't very good under pressure has been a narrative in the NFL and NFL media for a long time. But when you look at the pressure stats through our neat little tool here, he's actually one of, if not the best in the league last season, for example. So there is sort of a way to dispel, that idea of like, hey, actually, did you know that this is the case? And I do think the tool helps in that regard for sure. In terms of the statistics, we do have what we call base stats. So things that you would see in a traditional box score: completions, attempts, yards, that sort of thing. But we also keep our advanced stats where who pressured the quarterback, who allowed the pressure, who was the targeted defender, was it a creative catch, was it a good throw, was it a bad throw? We collect all sorts of data, something like 80 plus fields on every single play to describe the play and really paint a picture of what happened on those plays. So you, like I said, you could really cut it up in any way that you could imagine, and then get the results to sort of prove or disprove, perhaps taking the idea of wandering or the idea of narratives out of it.
Yeah, it sounds very thorough in that regard. If we're to zoom out a little bit, can you tell us about FTN Network and also kind of your role within the organization as the Chief Data Officer?
Sure. So ftnfantasy.com is where all of our B2C, our business to customer content lives. We have the fantasy site first and foremost, or the fantasy section of the site that is primarily seen over by Jeff Ratcliffe and Aaron Schatz, who develop projections and advice and advanced stats and all of that good stuff for our fantasy customers. We have a betting aspect as well, where we have a Discord that's fairly active of people sharing plays and our own analysts sharing plays and directing them to the tools and tables and things that we build to help the bettor. And we have the DFS aspect as well for those of you that might play the traditional DraftKings or FanDuel, and what's now evolving into the Prize Picks and Underdogs, where you run your little parlay cards that have developed over here finally, that's seen in Canada and probably in the UK, where you develop these parlay cards, and we provide tools to help you build that sort of thing out. In my role, as we also have the data side of everything that I was explaining earlier about all of our data collection. And we have a charting team of 50 plus guys that I oversee, as well as a couple charting managers that oversee those guys as well, where they watch every play from every NFL game and chart down literally every single thing that happens. We are then able to take that data, put in the database, build tools, build things like StatsHub. We also have projections and models and things that run 50,000 simulations to predict the outcome of all the sporting events, from college football, college basketball, NFL, MLB, NBA, of course, and provide that to our subscribers to say, here's sort of a more objective way to think about sports betting or DFS or whatever you might be playing.
Yeah, to your points about kind of depth of data and volume of information, having kind of visited the site a few times, and I think you can see straight away that it's the place to go for kind of information, and I think you're a depth fantasy player, that's what they want, rather than something that kind of looks like it might have something, but actually you click in and there's not really much depth to it. Right. When it comes to StatsHub, obviously, you already outlined that's kind of the main idea. What I'm interested in personally is, where do you kind of source the data, and have you kind of any official agreements in place with that kind of thing?
No, so we collect all of our own data, which is what makes it kind of neat. Like I mentioned, we have 50 plus guys that watch all the games and every play. I think we have 5 or 6 that watch every play from each game. So as we get 16 games deep, in a full NFL week, that gets to be quite cumbersome. We have something around 16 to 20 hours into every game among our team, collecting that data and then redistributing it out. And it's a lot of work. We actually can get close to around 24-hour turnaround times this year. So ideally, the game ends on a Sunday night, and by Monday night, Tuesday morning, all of that data and all of our tools and models and everything is updated right off the rip.
Mm-hmm. So that's quite a unique proposition you're offering, in that it's effectively all bespoke data. And this is not a 100% serious question, but I guess, do you have any members of your team where their wife might be at home and say, "Oh, you're watching football again"? They say, "Oh, it's my job. I've got to watch every play over and over."
Yeah, it's an interesting job for sure. I can't do it, to be honest. It's dry, but there are those people, as you could imagine, the diehards out there. A lot of them not even really football players themselves in the traditional sense, or maybe they played in high school, but they love the sport and they love learning about the sport, and it's almost a way for them to gain their own information and their own fantasy side. I joke around a lot of the time and say a lot of our guys would do it for free, and if you propose that, they won't do that. But I think a lot of these guys watch film in their spare time, even when it's not with us. So we really look for the diehards that they don't necessarily need to be ex coaches or ex players or anything like that. A lot of the best guys we have are just guys that love the game or got started in fantasy and are really passionate about football and on Sundays. But I'm sure they do get in trouble with the wives, for sure. But hopefully us expanding the team out quite a bit this year will allow them to have a little more free time.
Sure. I wanted to ask about the business model, but you kind of already mentioned subscribers and subscription. Is it primarily subscription, or do you kind of have advertising revenue on top of that as well?
We have monthly and annual subscriptions throughout, for sure. On the data side, we work with other B2B customers that will, potentially have contracts and whatnot, but a lot of them are even year to year. But yeah, we redistribute our data, but our B2C side is just a subscription-based model, yeah.
Mm-hmm, sure. And in terms of the target audience, a huge focus on fantasy. Is there kind of much of a sports betting aspect to it as well, and if so, kind of how much?
Yeah, definitely. Our main business and our main drive is fantasy football, in the aspect that is the biggest audience, right? That is how people find us, and that is how people through our Sirius XM shows and whatnot are able to spot FTN and then come to the site and sign up. What we're finding this year, that, as we sort of blend the aspects of the DFS side, the betting side, and the fantasy side together, a lot of people are upgrading to what we would call our VIP package, which is just all three aspects of that. We don't think that customer generally is that different, right? Most people that play fantasy also bet on sports. I would say the vast majority of people, as sports betting is becoming more and more legal in the United States, across the states, that customer has a blended view of what they're interested in and where they're going to spend their money. It's a little bit more entertainment value, right? Or perhaps there are certain fantasy guys on their team that they like to bet some of their props or whatever it may be. And we're able to then cross-pollinate across the site, and we're seeing a large percentage, even more than we had anticipated, upgrading, which confirms our thought that the fantasy player is also the better, or the DFS player across the United States at least.
Mm-hmm. No, that definitely the crossover makes a lot of sense, and of course that's something that DraftKings and FanDuel, in kind of the very early days, after the overturning of PASPA, kind of capitalized on. And sure. I suppose as a someone who works within fantasy, what's kind of your view of how that journey developed, fantasy crossing over to sports, and perhaps where the future of that lies?
I think the vast majority of people betting now were betting then. Before, maybe
sure.
I don't know the actual law and how it worked in terms of whether that was illegal for the consumer necessarily or not. But I do think the vast majority, even if it was bets between buddies, right, or a local bookie or something like that, I do think that existed for the vast majority of people that are betting now, or at least half of the people that are betting now. So I don't think that changed a whole lot, but I do think it changed on how we perceive it, how we talk about it, the ease of getting that fantasy person to cross over. I would wager, for lack of a better term, wager that most of the people, on our site, given the access and the ease of use and the lower price subscription and all of that, they're probably only betting $10, $15, $20 a game at most, right? And that's the type of consumer we want, right? Like the professional sports bettors and the people that are betting hundreds of dollars a game probably have other means or ways to get betting advice, or they are doing their own sort of thing, where we can sort of provide tools and information to the passive bettor to hopefully at least get them to break even or make a little bit of money on the side. But I think for the most part, this is more of a entertainment value for the vast majority of us.
Yeah, sure. No, really interesting, and I think that's certainly a shared proposition for a lot of the operators too, and even with I mentioned DraftKings, FanDuel. I know that's the kind of customer they're targeting in general as well. A couple of more general trends I wanted to ask you about, but obviously all overlapping and related. Sports kind of consumption today, how people watch their sport, how they kind of, even the fact that we're talking about fantasy and sports. A lot of people are going to be having 2 or 3 screens, certainly 2, their phone and watching the game on TV. What do you make of kind of how that has developed and is developing? And also just considering a guest recently on the Huddle mentioned that 10 years ago, walking to work and watching highlights of the Olympics on their phone wasn't necessarily a thing even back then. And now it's all changed.
Yeah, it is. The development is interesting on the tech side. We're becoming engulfed in a world where people were becoming fans of other teams and players that maybe they didn't have access to before. I liken it to my dad telling me growing up about how they would watch the Braves games simply because they were on TV, and we're in Pittsburgh, which is a good 10 hours drive away from Atlanta Braves, right? So it's quite. They could only watch that because that's what they got, right? And now we can get anything. I'm even seeing the expansion of, I apologize, but the expansion of soccer over here, where a lot of my friends are watching soccer that they would have never had access to before, but they can watch it on their streaming devices and on their phones or whatever they can get access to. So I do think sports betting is also helping that expansion. For example, right now, we have baseball, and that's about it. And the WNBA has definitely exploded, not only with Caitlin Clark, but among, the last 3-4 years. I'm noticing a lot of people getting way more into WNBA, and I think it's really the prevalence of sports betting that has expanded that. It has made other people fans of other leagues, including sort of the more niche leagues besides the NFL and some bigger products that are out there.
Yeah, sure. No, more kind of interesting observations, and another trend which I think is it's probably becoming more global, as you say, with an access to kind of technology. But it's
Hmm.
definitely something that we kind of people have said, and we've seen kind of in the US, a loyalty to kind of players, perhaps
Hmm.
trumping loyalties to teams. So, I mean, this could even potentially impact their betting and their fantasy play. Because
Sure.
whether we like it or not, sometimes we might bet a little bit more if we like the player or like the team. Um, you know, just how interesting is that really? Let's say if there's a star in the NBA, if they move team, it doesn't really matter as much these days what the team is. It's more kind of about the player.
Yeah, I think that's generally becoming more of a trend. I mean, we definitely still see a lot of team loyalty in sports here, but I definitely notice more of a trend. I think it's easier for folks to root for a given player in the sense that, for example, I'm a Pittsburgh Pirates fan. They've had two good seasons. I'm 33 years old, and they've had two good seasons in my entire life. It's really hard for me to root for a team that is pretty outwardly not trying to win or has struggled to win, because halfway through the season, you're pretty much out of it. And it's even more so the case in the NFL. If you lose three of the first four games of the season, your odds of making the playoffs or being successful that year are extremely low, probably less than, 5-10%. So
Mhm.
you get in a situation where you have to root for something. And I think the fantasy game, I think the prop betting, all of that stuff as it grows throughout the US has developed into where people are more likely to become fans of players. Not to mention that players typically are switching teams probably more frequently now than what they did before, as the brands grow, their personal brands grow, they get bigger contracts to leave. There's a little bit less loyalty to teams on their side as well, which I can't blame them, right? They're getting paid quite a bit of money to switch team. Why wouldn't they do so? And I think that all of that movement has developed into people rooting for players and maybe a little bit less so for teams.
Yeah, and I think there's perhaps something to be said about kind of social media as well, when individual athletes might have millions of followers on Instagram or something like that.
Hmm.
It's easier for them to engage. I mean, I do take your point about this. There's still obviously team loyalty because I think when it comes to the EPL, as some might call it, the Premier League in
Hmm.
England, I think that's still quite tribal when it comes to teams. So it'll be interesting to see how a younger generation who might be more into the player, kind of how that works out over here. But
Hmm.
yeah, interesting food for thought, and especially when it comes to, as you say, kind of fantasy picks and things like that. Generally speaking, plenty of thanks for your time so far. Plenty of really interesting conversation. A final topic to just end on, maybe just looking ahead, looking at the future. Obviously, StatsHub, is a big project for you guys. For the rest of this year and for the NFL season ahead, what do you guys got on your agenda in terms of goals and targets?
Sure, especially on our side, expanding what we're doing for NFL has just become widely popular with all of the advanced data that we're charting and collecting. We're going to expand into the NBA and begin charting NBA games, and a lot of the guys that are on the NFL charting side are going to be moving over to our NBA team as well, and developing a product there. We're seeing massive growth. I think the Olympics were a good example of that. We're seeing massive growth here with the NBA, particularly with advanced stats in the NBA. That's definitely becoming a thing. Things that are a little bit more drilled down to say, okay, how good is this team, or how good is this individual player, or even how good is a scheme of a coach, for example, and decision making and things like that. So we certainly want to capitalize on that. There's not much here in terms of availability to advanced data. I think the NBA is even more sectioned off than the NFL was with some of this early going, and some of this advanced data collection has really boosted the NFL and the product that's there and the analysis that's there. So I do think that there's room to grow in the NBA. To break down individual players or individual teams to a deeper level. So we're expanding our operations. Hopefully, there'll be an NBA Stats Hub product of some sort next year, the year after, and be able to make that data more available to consumers.
Yeah, and that sounds like some members of your team, in addition to the hours they're already watching football, they're going to add some hours of basketball to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some guys that can't stand it. There's some guys that are actually switching over because they're pretty good or like it a bit more. So I will say the NBA is a little bit easier than the NFL because there aren't just a bunch of guys running into each other, and it's not a big mashup, and the players are more easily recognizable. It's more of a flowing game, right? So NBA is a little bit easier, which makes it nice.
Yeah, fair enough. But Brank, thanks very much for your time. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. And to our viewers, thanks for watching.